Hello again! Today I decided to make a butterfly sitting in a little box frame that you could easily do at home. Sorry that this is a small video, didn't have a lot of time on my hands this week, but let's get into it. So, this is the box frame I'm going to use. It has just about enough space for a little sculpture in there. It's quite useful actually. To start off, I get some foil and start folding it into the shape of the wing that I want to create. If you are going to make this at some point, which I hope you try, then of course there are many different shapes of butterfly wings that you could do. This is just the one that I chose. It's kind of just more of a general butterfly shape. Like when you think of a butterfly, it's got the two big ones and the two little ones, and yeah. So after folding them out, I then flatten them with some pliers as well, because I want the wings to be as flat as possible, and also so that they're a little bit more bendable. I then also cut out some extra wire for the main body later on. I then roll out some clay, making sure to get it as thin as I possibly can without it splitting. Then after placing the foil down onto the clay, I trace the foil so that I get the right shape and size of the clay that I need, making sure to leave a bit of clay around the edges so that I can curl it up and around, so that it won't rip off the foil when I try and pick it up off the table. Then I do the other side. Again, cutting it out and tracing it, but then making sure to blend the seams between the two sides as well, as it can be a bit visible and a bit dangerous. Not dangerous obviously, but it could come off if you don't make sure that it's stuck on correctly. Of course I do the exact same process for the little wings. I do change their sizes a few times as they are a bit big at the start and I didn't really notice that. Then I cut out a line of clay, making sure to cut down the middle of it so that I can fit the wire into that little crevice, pushing it in there and then curling it up around so that the clay kind of engulfs it and I can blend the seams together. I then use this to attach the wings. I make sure that, again, there aren't any seams, but I do create an artificial seam later with one of my tools. But for now I just attach the wings on, making sure that they're stable enough and also at the right angle, because I don't want it to just be completely flat. I want it to be slightly upturned and a bit curled around. After I've gotten the wings all into the places that I want with all the seams blended, I then start separating the main parts of the body, the head, the torso, and the bit at the end, I don't know what it's called. And then I begin to make the lines on the wings using this sharper silicone tool. I don't follow general patterns, I just go with what feels right and what looks the best, making sure to add some little curls in there, some straight lines, not really circles, but just lots of different shapes, kind of splitting up into the sections, and also remembering that the paint job later on is what's going to really put in all that detail. All I'm really doing is kind of not separating sections almost, but creating lines that are gonna actually end up being those little black lines later on. Definitely the hardest part of creating this butterfly was mirroring each side, trying to get them as similar as possible, and it was so difficult. But after kind of just going back and forth and keep correcting my mistakes because there were so many, I finally got it. When it came to these bottom two, I kind of learned by my mistakes for the top two and kind of went through them almost kind of at the same time instead of doing one and then the other, so that they're more in line. Actually no, you know what, I take that back because I didn't do that. Look, okay, there we go. Start working on the other side. I also make sure that the thorax is a little bit bigger as well. I got the name right. Did you see that? I then start to make the antenna. So I use little tiny pieces of wire, attaching them to the top of the head and making sure that they're all in there and secure. I add some little eyes and then start texturing using this kind of longer ball tool. On the thorax, I do scrape longer lines to make it look as if the hair is a little bit longer. Then on the abdomen down there, I make the lines a little bit smaller to make it look like the hair's a little bit smaller. On top of the antenna, I add the little balls at the end, which you see. Again, I can't remember what they're called. Editing cape. But I then also add some liquid Sculpey onto the wire. This just protects them and makes it so that later on when I paint it, the paint won't chip off the wire. Kind of adds that sort of adhesive layer. This will just dry like clay in the oven. And then it's baked. So I was very close to painting the red first because I am doing red, but then I realised the best course of action is to do black first. This means that the black can go into all of those little lines that I created earlier, meaning that when I do the red later, it's easier and I won't have to then go in with a really tiny paintbrush trying to get them all nice and smooth into those lines. That would have been annoying. So I just painted the entire thing black. After that's dried, this is what I was talking about. I then go in on those sections and start painting them red instead of having to do the black lines later on. It's actually quite satisfying. I'm surprised that I didn't mess it up too many times because I thought I was gonna get them all into those little crevices, but if you see my other videos, this is kind of on the same line as dry brushing, where you put paint on the raised up areas after you've already put the paint in the kind of indents, but it's not really the same thing, you know. So this red is quite a dark red, right? But this is the mid-tone. So after I've painted all the sections, I then go in on these outer ones with a lighter red. Just layering it up and making sure that there's no black bits peeking through. It does get quite red at some point, so I do have to tone it down a little bit because it was an accident, didn't mean for it to be that bright. But here comes my cat. She's always in the way. This does look a little bit brown, but it's red. It's a very dark red that I then put on the inner kind of sections of the body. Again, following that same thing of just doing it on the raised areas. Then I go in with this tiny sponge. I rip this off a much bigger sponge, and I go in with that lighter red that I was talking about earlier, putting it on the edges of this mid-tone. This creates just a little bit of a gradient, makes it look a bit more interesting because it was looking a little bit flat. I didn't really like that. There are ways that you could do this without using a sponge. You can get a paintbrush which is kind of dry with only a little bit of paint on it and just dabbing it on those edges, kind of similar to how I'm doing it with the sponge, because I guess it is quite hard to use a tiny little sponge like this, so I had to hold it kind of in between my fingernails. Then I go in with this nice warm toned brown colour for the thorax. And then going in with a slightly darker one on top, kind of doing that dry brushing thing that I was talking about earlier. Then to make it really pop, I go in with white. You can do this with just a paintbrush, but I decided to go in with one of my ball tools because it just makes it a bit easier to get those circular shapes in, even though it did make them look a little bit uneven at times, but that's okay. I put them mostly on all of the black bits, but as well as doing them on some of the inner darker lines, and then using that really dark red that I had used on the inner parts and putting them onto the outer parts, the lighter reds. The back will not be visible. I'm just going to put that out there. You will not be able to see the back in the final piece. But I still wanted to just add a bit of red on there, just so that if by any means you can, for some reason, see under it, there's something there. Then I go through 3 different colour changes on the background because I couldn't decide, then decided on this kind of very light, creamy kind of colour. The other 2 were just a bit too dark for me. I also go in with that bigger sponge that I was talking about earlier. making sure to even out all of that paint that I just layered down. This also saves time because I don't have to do multiple layers to get it to look even. After that's finished, I then pour some resin. It might look blue, it's not blue. This is the last resin underneath it. That is not blue, it's just clear resin that I want to put on top to make it all nice and shiny. You don't have to do this if you have just a general gloss or some sort of something that could go on top to make it, to make sure that the paint stays in place and doesn't chip off. That's also going to be good. But I go with resin because I think it makes it nice and shiny. I like shiny looks on things sometimes. Don't get to use resin all that often. I also put it on the background as well because that paint also has a likelihood of chipping off. I also see a little bit of hair there. Don't like that. Then I do use my fingers to spread around the resin. Of course I have gloves on. If you have ever gotten resin on your hands, you know the absolute pain that it is. It doesn't go away, it just kind of stays. Now, of course I didn't show that I attached the butterfly. I did, but then I took it off because the glue was horrible. So after the resin had dried, I went in with a much nicer super glue and stuck it right in the centre, exactly where I wanted to hold it. I did test a few times to make sure that it would fit in the frame, and after seeing that it did, it's finished. I really hope you enjoy this one, and I really do hope also that it encourages you to try out some sculpting, because this is very simple and very easy and you can do it in any colour, shape, size, whatever you want to do. So again, I hope you like the video. If you want to see other things, you can subscribe. I won't do a lot more like this, but have a great day. Leave a like if you do like it, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!